If you're learning English and you always forget vocabulary whenever you learn it, then watch this video. Because in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about this problem, and it's a very common problem that so many of my students have. They can't remember vocabulary. They can't remember the words they've learned. So let's talk about this. Now, first of all, the reason for this is very, very simple. If you forget a word you learned, it's because you're not using it enough in conversation. You're not speaking enough. You're not using that word in your everyday speech. Think about this. The first word or words you learned in English were probably hi, hello, how are you, right? Basic stuff like that. I promise you that you will never forget those words. You will never forget how to say hello in English, because that's something you do every day. And it's the same with anything. It's the same with any topic, whether you're talking about the weather, or you're talking about politics, or you're talking about philosophy. It's the same. If you don't use the vocabulary, you're going to forget it. So that's the first step. You have to realize that you're not remembering words, you're forgetting words because you're not using them. Now, how do you actually do this? How do you actually make an effort to use new words in conversation? Well, first of all, you got to find the words. You need to know which words to use. And there are so many different ways of expanding your vocabulary. I won't talk too much about this today, but one strategy I do recommend is creating a list. This is actually what I did when I learned German. I got this notebook, and inside the notebook, whenever I learned a new word, I would write it down. So whenever I was reading something on the internet or in a book and I didn't recognize a word, I would translate it from German into English, and then I would write it down in this notebook. And basically in here, I have a notebook that's full of German words and English translations. So that was the first step. And I also like to organize these words into topics. For example, vocabulary about politics, or about music, or about sports, because that really helped me organize the vocabulary and organize the words. So that way, if I wanted to review the vocabulary later, I could just find the section on music or on sports or on whatever topic I wanted. So try to organize the new words you learn. Now, once you have these words, you have to use them in conversation. And of course, you do need somebody to practice with. If you don't know how to do this, if you don't have anybody to practice with, then watch this video. It's another video I made where I teach you exactly how to practice speaking English if you don't have anybody to speak to. So watch that video. You can actually play a little game with yourself. And I did exactly this when I was learning German. Whenever I had a conversation with somebody, maybe that was my teacher or a German-speaking friend, I would play a game with myself. And I wouldn't tell the other person what I was doing. It was more just something for myself, something personal. But I entered every conversation with a goal. And that goal was to take 5, 6, 7 words and use those words in that conversation. So the conversation would be successful only if I used those words. It was almost like checking boxes off. So I would really recommend you do this as well when you're learning English. You can set aside a week for one topic. For example, the topic of this week might be nature. It might be art. Something you're interested in, something you've been reading about lately, and obviously a topic where you have vocabulary to study. Before we continue the video, make sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments if you find learning new vocabulary difficult, if you have any strategies that you use to learn and memorize new vocabulary, or if you have any suggestions for future videos on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe to English at the Ready here on YouTube, and click the link in the description below to learn more about how I can help you improve your English. I have some great courses and programs which I know will help you improve your grammar, your reading, your writing, your speaking, your pronunciation, your listening, your vocabulary, and so much more. So click that link in the description below. Let's talk a bit about your mindset, how you approach learning new vocabulary, because it's very easy to get discouraged if you learn something and then you forget it a week later. It's very easy to get frustrated, and I encountered this problem when I was learning German. You have to be realistic, because if you see a word once, it's not realistic to assume that you're going to remember that word. Let's be honest, you're probably going to forget the word if you've just seen it once. And maybe out of 10 words, you'll only remember 3. That's a 30% success rate. But that's still better than nothing. And if you've seen 10 words and you remember 3, well, now you have 3 new words that you remember and that you can actually start using. Another thing to keep in mind is that just because you see a word once and you don't remember it the next week doesn't mean that you haven't seen any success. Because what will happen is you might see a word, you might look up the definition, you might understand it, and then next week you forget it. Next week you can't remember what that word was. But then 2 weeks later, you see that same word again. Maybe it looks a bit familiar, so you look it up in the dictionary, you remember it, but you still can't use it in conversation. And then maybe 1 month later, or 2 months later, you see that word again for a third time and you remember it. So it takes numerous points of contact with the word to actually remember it. And that's completely normal. So just because you don't remember a word the first time doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you need some more points of contact. It will take more time to finally make that word a part of your vocabulary. So keep that in mind if you feel discouraged, if you feel frustrated. Unless you're some sort of superhuman genius, you won't see a word and remember it 100% of the time. Keep your expectations realistic. Now, lastly, I want to give you one more strategy that personally I've not used. I don't find it too helpful, but I know a lot of my students do, and that strategy is using flashcards. Flashcards are basically little sheets of paper. There are also digital flashcards too, and on one side you have the word, and on the other side you have the definition. So flashcards can help you. Using flashcards is a bit of a more academic way of studying. It might be something you did at school or at university. So personally, I don't find it too helpful, but you can use this method. You can sit on the bus in the morning and review these flashcards, try to quiz yourself, try to test yourself. As I said earlier, I really prefer the more natural way of learning vocabulary, which is using it in conversation, making an effort to use those new words when you're speaking. Because language needs to be spoken. Language is communication. And if you can use those words in the real world, it's going to help your brain remember them. It's going to increase your chances of memorizing them. So whenever you learn a new word, write it down in a notebook. And when you go into conversation with somebody, try to use those words deliberately in the conversation. Again, if you have any more strategies and tips on how to memorize new vocabulary, let me know in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to English at the Ready here on YouTube so you don't miss any future English lessons from me. If you want to study with me and my team, we have some great courses and programs available. Just click the link in the description below or go to englishattheready.com to learn more about how we can help you improve your English communication skills. I hope you found this lesson useful, and I'll see you in the next one.